In the hush of ancient Japan, where bamboo whispered secrets to the wind, there lived an old woodcutter whose heart held a quiet ache. Each dawn he walked alone through misty groves, his hands knowing every groove of the forest, yet his home remained silent of children's laughter. He was not bitter, merely patient, like the bamboo itself, hollow with waiting, yet rooted in hope. His old wife would pack him rice balls wrapped in leaves, and he would smile, though the corners of his eyes crinkled with a loneliness deeper than any forest shadow. For 70 winters he had cut and carved, believing perhaps that wonder had forgotten him, never guessing that destiny was preparing to shine through the green stalks above his head. One morning, the air tasted different, like silver and rainbows. The old man raised his axe to cut a particularly fine clump of bamboo when suddenly the grove flooded with light. Not the harsh light of noon, but a soft, milky luminescence that made every leaf glow like jade lanterns. He dropped his axe in wonder, for the brightness seemed to sing without sound, turning the ordinary forest into a cathedral of green glass and pearl. The light pulsed from a single bamboo stalk, rhythmic as a heartbeat, calling to him with the warmth of a home he had never known but suddenly remembered. Moving as if in a dream, the woodcutter approached the radiant stalk. There, nestled in a hollow that seemed carved by moonbeams themselves, stood a tiny being no bigger than a thumb. She was perfect, delicate as a porcelain doll, dressed in gossamer that shimmered like spider silk at dawn. Her eyes opened and they held the depth of starry nights. She was crying, but her tears were tiny diamonds that vanished into the bamboo. The old man felt his heart crack open like a seed after winter, filling with a tenderness so fierce it brought tears to his own eyes. "Ah," he whispered, "you have been sent to be my child." With trembling hands, gentler than he had ever used with his sharpest blade, the old man cupped the little creature. She weighed nothing at all, yet she felt like the heaviest treasure in the world, precious as the first breath of spring. As he walked home through the now ordinary-looking forest, she glowed softly against his palms, warming his heart in places that had been cold for decades. Birds sang sweeter notes as he passed, and the path seemed to clear itself of stones. He cradled her close to his chest, shielding her from the wind, already whispering promises of stories and rice porridge and all the love that had been stored up in his soul like water in a deep well. His wife was weaving when he entered, but she dropped her shuttle when she saw the light in his hands. Together, they fashioned a cradle from the finest basket they owned, lining it with silk they had saved for 20 years against a joy that had never come until now. When they placed the tiny girl inside, she laughed, and the sound was like bells made of crystal. The old woman wept, happy tears, her face creasing into a map of joy, while the old man built up the fire. The basket glowed with a soft radiance that filled the humble room with dancing shadows and golden warmth, turning their poor cottage into a palace of contentment. From that blessed day, magic followed the woodcutter like a faithful dog. Each morning when he cut bamboo, he found not just pale wood, but gold nuggets nestled in the joints like honey and combs, and precious stones that caught the sunrise and threw rainbows across the walls. The old couple never asked why, for they understood that love often brings its own riches. They built a fine house with paper screens that glowed like lanterns at dusk, and a garden where flowers bloomed out of season to please the little one. Yet they remained humble, knowing that true wealth was the sound of small feet, though she grew so fast in the light that now filled their empty places. 3 months passed like 3 heartbeats, and the tiny child grew into a girl of such beauty that words seemed clumsy tools to describe her. She moved like moonlight on water, and wherever she stood, the air itself seemed to brighten. The old couple dressed her in kimonos of the finest silk, painted with cranes and cherry blossoms, and they placed her behind screens not to hide her, but because her radiance was too pure for common eyes. At night, her presence turned darkness into twilight. Candles burned brighter, stars seemed to lean closer to the roof, and sorrow could not enter the house, for her laughter was a spell against gloom. When the time came to name her, the old couple invited the most celebrated name-giver in the province, a man who spoke with the authority of poets and scholars. He looked upon the girl, saw how she filled the room with soft silver light, and declared her Princess Moonlight, daughter of the lunar deity, though she walked on earth. For 3 days the house rang with celebration. Musicians played flutes that sounded like wind through bamboo. Dancers spun like falling leaves, and the old couple's hearts swelled with pride as they watched their miraculous child receive the honors she deserved, yet remain gentle and kind, serving tea to the guests with her own small hands. Word spread like swallows in spring. There was a beauty in the land who outshone all others. Soon, young men from provinces near and far traveled dusty roads to stand outside the bamboo cutter's fence, hoping for a glimpse of this wonder. They peeped through holes, these hopeful suitors, their hearts hammering like woodpeckers against the wood. But Princess Moonlight remained serene behind her screens, not from pride, but from a strange knowing that grew in her breast, a feeling that she was waiting for something or someone that no earthly prince could provide. She pitied their longing, yet could not answer it, for her dreams were already full of celestial music. Winter came and buried the land in white, and most suitors fled back to warm hearths. But 5 remained, 5 knights of renown whose hearts were made of sterner stuff. They stood outside the house as snow piled on their shoulders, as frost painted their eyebrows white, refusing to move, eating only what servants brought to the gate. They were the first knight, with eyes like a hawk; the second, with hands that had known many battles; the third, whose voice was soft as velvet; the fourth, who wore his honor like armor; and the fifth, youngest and most ardent. Through winter's bite and summer's blaze, they kept their vigil, writing poems of love that piled up like leaves unread. When cherry blossoms fell like pink snow, the 5 knights remained. When the June rains turned the garden to mist, they stood like stone lanterns. The old bamboo cutter watched them with growing compassion, for he remembered what it was to long for something beautiful. He brought them tea and apologized for his daughter's silence, but they only bowed, saying that to love was its own reward. Yet as months became seasons, and seasons became a year, even their noble hearts began to ache with the weight of waiting. Finally, they sent a message, would she not grant them an audience, if only to refuse them to their faces? The old man found his daughter gazing at the moon, her face pale with a longing he could not understand. He knelt before her, not as a subject to a princess, but as a father to his child. "I'm over 70, he said, his voice trembling like dry leaves. "My bones know the grave is near. Before I go to the ancestors, I wish to see you protected, loved, cared for by a husband of worth." Princess Moonlight turned to him, her eyes swimming with tears that were not quite of earth. "Father," she said, touching his gray hair, "I love you as the bamboo loves the earth that feeds it, but marriage, that is a path I cannot walk." Yet compassion ruled her heart. She could not give herself, but she could give hope, however slender. She summoned the 5 knights to the garden, where fireflies danced like wandering stars. "If you would prove your love," she said, her voice like water over stones, "bring me these, the stone bowl of the Buddha from India, a branch from the golden tree of Horai, where silver roots drink from eternal springs, the skin of the fire rat of China, the 5-colored jewel from the head of the dragon, and the shell that the swallow carries in its stomach." The knights' faces fell, for these were tasks for heroes of legend, not mortal men. Yet love makes fools and heroes of us all, and they accepted. The first knight rode hard for 3 days, then stopped. India was too far, the seas too wild, the mountains too high. In Kyoto, he entered a temple, and with heavy gold purchased an ancient stone bowl from a priest who needed to repair his roof. For 3 years, he kept it wrapped in gold and silk, practicing his lies. When he returned, he presented it with a flourish. Princess Moonlight took the bowl, her fingers tracing its surface. She knew she did not accuse him, but her eyes were sad. "This bowl," she said gently, "has never held the Buddha's rice. It is heavy with deception, not enlightenment." The second knight was cunning. He hired the finest goldsmith and jeweler in the land, and together they crafted a branch of solid gold, with silver wire for roots and white jade for fruit. It was so beautiful that birds tried to perch upon it. When he laid it at her feet, he swore he had climbed the mountain of Horai itself. Princess Moonlight lifted the branch, and it sang with a false metallic chime. "It is lovely," she said, not unkindly, "but the tree of Horai sings with the voices of angels, not the clink of gold. You have brought me your skill, Sir Knight, but not your truth." The third knight traveled to China, where merchants laughed at his quest. Yet one sold him a fine fur, claiming it was the fire rat's pelt, warm in winter, cool in summer, and proof against any flame. The knight returned triumphant, laying the fur before Princess Moonlight. To test it, she touched a candle to the edge. Instantly, it burst into flames and turned to ash. The knight cried out in dismay. "Do not weep," she said, dusting the ash from her fingers. The fire rat's skin would have danced with the flames like a friend. This was only the coat of a common beast. Your journey was long, let that be your reward. The fourth night sought the dragon for 3 years, sailing stormy seas and climbing craggy mountains. He found many things, pearls, adventure, scars, but the dragon with the 5-colored jewel remained a legend. Finally, weary and ashamed, he returned empty-handed. "I failed," he said simply, kneeling before her. Princess Moonlight looked at him with new respect. "You did not bring me a stone," she said, "but you bring me something rarer, honesty. The dragon lives, but he does not give his jewel to those who seek glory. You have my gratitude, if not my hand." He left with a lighter heart than those who had lied. The fifth knight was young and believed that love could conquer cliffs. He climbed the highest peak where swallows nested, searching for the shell that cures all ills. But the birds defended their young, and the rocks were treacherous. He slipped, and though he caught himself on a ledge, he could not climb back. There he remained for 7 days, calling her name, until the wind took his voice. They found him holding a single white feather, but no shell. When the princess heard, she wept truly, for he had given his life for a dream of her. He understood, she whispered, that some things are worth the seeking, even in failing. Now the emperor himself heard tales of this moon-bright maiden who refused even the noblest knights. Intrigued, he traveled to the bamboo cutter's house in a procession of gold and silk. He was a man of power, accustomed to being obeyed, yet when he saw Princess Moonlight, just a glimpse of her sleeve behind the screen, his heart stopped as if struck by lightning. He forgot his empress, his throne, his very name. He sent poems written in his own hand, declaring that the sun had met the moon at last, and surely they must unite. But Princess Moonlight replied that even the Emperor of Japan could not command the tides or the moon to descend from the sky.